So like this is a panel on the future of block proposal. As you know, like it's a space where there is a lot of movement right now, and so we are very lucky to have a nice speakers here. So we have Justin from the Ethereum Foundation, which I think you probably know him. Like he's been there a few times before at Kiln for the rendezvous. And he's been pioneering a lot of things we are going to talk today, especially like around EPBS and also execution tickets, MEV burn, and it's a small list, but there is way more, and also on pre-confirmations. Then we have Alex from the ultrasound relayer. So it's like, I think, one of the only relayers that is censorship resistant. So we'll have this perspective on what's happening next from a relayer point of view. Then we have Terence from Offchain Labs. So Terence is like one of the main contributors of the Prism consensus client, and he's done a lot of work on EPBS, which is like the enshrined version of PBS, which we'll introduce just after. And finally, we have Drew from the MEV-Boost initiative, whose goal is to propose alternate path for block proposal based on top of MEV-Boost. It's like a rework of MEV-Boost with more possibilities, let's say. So let's start. So the panel is going to be in 3 parts. Like we'll first talk a bit about what's the current state with MEV-Boost and PBS. Then we'll discuss about EPBS, and finally we'll have time for execution tickets and stock auctions. So right now about 95% of blocks are produced by outside of the protocol via MEV-Boost. So basically the model is like you have builders who bid in the public auctions through relayers, and on the other side you have validators who picks up basically the most profitable block. And so like this has been around for since the merge almost about 2 years ago. And so there are some issues with like having this outside of the protocol. So let's start with a quick question from Alex from the relayer perspective. So like a few months ago, there were like some issues on another relayer, which I won't name, but around like blobs propagation. And so like this is a typical issue where there is no visibility on the relayer side, and we don't know exactly what's happening, and it's quite hard to investigate. Yeah. What's your take on this kind of issues from a relayer perspective?
Yeah. It's a very interesting one. I feel like there's 2 sides to it. One is around just building reliable software, where fundamentally it's the proposer that's saying like, okay, I want to use someone to propose with, and I'm going to give away this right, and then it's a little bit out of my hands. And if the one you're giving it to is then like messing up and not proposing a block, then if you want reliable software, you don't keep doing that if it fails every time, right? There's some point where you have to say like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be doing that anymore, and that's a way that clients could improve there. And the same on the relayer side, whether it's the relayer or the block builder that's the one that is messing up here, there should be a point where you're saying like, okay, my software isn't working, like we need to do something, we need to change something, we need to have a fail-safe or a circuit breaker that improves it. That's sort of the obvious like, okay, building reliable software. But then there's a more concrete question of like, why isn't this happening, or how do we actually make it happen? And there it gets more incentives of how many people do we see, for example, that switch away and that say like, oh, I see who the person was that did this. Let me switch like who I'm like working with to do this. That would be a really strong incentive. Now as a relayer, I'm incentivized to do this. And that, for example, I didn't really get any messages from operators or something like that saying like, hey, like we want more, right? And if that doesn't happen, then there's for us not much of an incentive there. I feel like there's 2 sides. One is just over time software becomes more reliable, and I think we can do that with clients. We can do that out of protocol. And the other side is like, are we being mindful of who we're trusting and what the incentives are and what that results in? So far it seems like we can miss a couple and people don't seem to care that much. But I'm all for not missing slots. That sounds great.
From our perspective on this specific event, like we basically disabled it for a few days, and then it made things move a bit faster.
That's great.
But it's like from we operate a lot of validators, so it's easy for us to like see like out of 100 blocks that we are missing a lot from a specific relayer. But like for solo stakers and like folks who are like handling a smaller production, it's way harder to find those issues. So it's quite hard. So yeah, I have another question related to like MEV-Boost for Drew. Like, could you explain to us like what's MEV-Boost about and how it can maybe help making like the block proposal space a bit better?
Commit Boost, the TLDR is it's a validator platform to safely make commitments. Today, block proposers generally, we all somewhat agree that they make one commitment, which is what Alex described, where I'm willing to give away the right to stack the block or construct the block that gets stacked. And what Commit Boost is about is allowing the proposer to give more conditions around how the block is constructed. And there's a lot of ideas of what this could turn into, but what it allows for the proposer to do is be more opinionated on what's in their block. So instead of just wholesale saying, build my block, it's build my block, but it must abide by these conditions. And there's a lot of things that come from this. Pre-comps is one interesting area where they can make commitments around, but home stakers can say, instead of relying on, if they run MEV-Boost, someone not to censor, they can actually say, do not censor in my block. And so it's like a proactive way for them to make conditions around how the block is constructed. The project itself is open source, public good, be housed in a nonprofit. There's no monetization. So for me, it's been really rewarding to work with great teams like Kilm. Talked a lot with Terrence and the ultrasound team to help design this in the best way. And it'll be MEV-Boost compatible. And the way to think about this is MEV-Boost is just one commitment a proposer can make, but there'll be a whole plethora of others. So day one, it's 100% backwards compatible for that. And back to Alex's kind of point, it's the dynamic of giving the proposer more tools. And that can help them if they agree with the ethos of Ethereum or have different values to reflect those, but giving the proposers the ability to make those values known versus the downstream providers, either relays or builders themselves.
Nice. I don't know if someone else wants to discuss on this, or like we can jump to another hot topic. So right now, timing games are like a thing. Like, what's your perspective, Justin, on the current landscape and how it looks like?
Right. So timing games is one of the loose ends of proposer-builder separation. The idea of proposer-builder separation was that all the sophistication be shunted to the builders. But unfortunately, there's this little loose end where the proposer can be sophisticated in terms of when they call get header from the relay, so basically when they interact with the relay. And it turns out that if you delay the get header request within some safety bounds, you get more MEV and you only marginally increase the risk of getting reorged. And so the increase in MEV kind of is much greater than the loss of revenue from increased reorgs, and sophisticated operators do that. Now, this is just one of the outcomes of the way the system was designed. It's kind of a fundamental thing, and one of the ideas to address it is called attester-proposer separation. And there's like two main sub-ideas within that, two main proposals. One is execution tickets, and the other one execution auctions. Yesterday I gave a talk on execution auctions, but the basic idea of attester-proposer separation is that the validators are no longer the ones that do the proposing. So not only have we given the building to the wider market, but the proposing itself is given to the wider market. And so all the loose ends, and there's three of them, timing games, MEV spikes, and overloading of the proposer with things like commitments and pre-confirmations, all that sophistication goes to the market and it stays away from the validators, whose main role now is just attesting, which is super simple.
So like timing games are going to move on the builder side, and so they will still exist, but it's just going to be different stakeholders which impact hopefully less the protocol.
And like logically speaking, the entity, we call them execution proposers, which could be technically speaking separate from the builders, but in practice they might be one entity.
Okay. So we're like skipping ahead a bit of the original agenda, but we can like continue on execution tickets and SOT auctions. So one argument like around in this area is that like because the builders will be in like power of like basically it can like increase centralization on the builder side. Like this is one argument, because like right now the landscape of builders is way much smaller than on the validator set. Like on the validator set you have dozens of operators, whereas on the builder side it's more like 4 or 5 entities. because like we are like basically like selling in advance, like in the stock auction view, like you can like sell in advance slot, and they can just buy slots and just do something with them. Do you think they will compete in the same way to buy the slots, or well, basically like my question is like, is there any risk of like increasing centralization on the builder side, or not? How do you see it?
Right. So in terms of builder centralization, one of the attitudes you want to take as a protocol designer for the L1 is assume the worst case. So assume that there's one builder and it's run by the devil, and you still want your blockchain to be censorship resistant and like work, as intended. There are downsides to builder centralization that are kind of fundamental. One of them is mimetic, right? It's a very bad look if Citadel were to build all blocks, even though fundamentally they can't censor, they can't cause liveness failures or safety failures or things like that. So yeah, that's one aspect. Can you repeat the question? I actually forgot. Oh yeah. So one thing that will change with that could change with these new auctions is that the bidding, instead of happening in real time or just in time, it happens ahead of time, and so the dynamics change a little bit because now it's about predicting future MEV as opposed to acting upon current MEV. And that does mean that you need to have a new skill where you need to be able to price these things. In theory, like the execution proposers can just be extremely good at predicting the price of future MEV without having the skill of building. So what is possible is that you actually combine the two types of auctions. You have execution proposers that participate in these ahead of time auctions, and then in real time, they sell the slot, just like MEV-Boost, to the builders. So the builders don't necessarily have to become more sophisticated.
I would like, to add my 2 cents, like I feel like it does look a bit similar. Then maybe we get like a new group of 3 parties of mathematics and physics PhDs that like are working really hard to like do this prediction kind of thing. I feel like it's a similar problem in some way, but I also feel fundamentally it's like, do you want it to be open where the best party can win? Then, if there is a party that's the best at it, then they're going to win. And that seems like the only other options to say, okay, can we design a set of rules, like a protocol, where we're now going to have all these like restrictions on what you can do. And I feel like, again, I think of inclusion lists, for example, when I hear this, to make sure that it's clear that you can still get your transaction in, like whoever you are. Like this property we're still going to preserve. The only thing that maybe gets really centralized is the part where somebody is really good at building a block that extracts the most amount of profit without compromising the inclusion list. And that's maybe fine. We get like the most valuable blocks we can get while getting the censorship resistance that we want. And I like that open model instead of like we're gonna say there have to be at least 12 builders, and like if one hasn't been their turn yet, then they get the block for free or something like that. That gets a bit strange.
One other thing I'll say is that there's kind of this notion of enough sophistication to be able to do anything. So right now, like the top 3 builders, we know who they are. We've met them in person. They're extremely sophisticated, and they're sophisticated enough to just handle the uncertainty about the future. And like if they need to do a bit of extra pricing, or if they need to scale horizontally, they can do that. And so, basically, putting more and more on the builders, I don't think will lead to more centralization because there's this escape velocity of sophistication that we've reached.
Makes sense. Let's talk a bit about EPBS and so right now, all of what we discussed is future, I guess midterm/long-term future. There's a lot of research on execution tickets and stock auctions, but more concrete right now, I guess, is EPBS. Terence released the EIP. I forgot the number, but it was last week. So this is the effort to shove into the protocol the current PBS mode with MEV-Boost. And part of it is also around inclusion lists. I don't think it's in the EIP, but you did also work to see how it would be integrated in EPBS. So maybe you can describe EPBS from your perspective, and also then as a second question, how would inclusion list could be added on top of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this EIP is EIP7732. So to be more specific, this is a block auction type of EPBS. So you have MEV-Boost today. This basically just enshrine MEV-Boost into the protocol. And instead of having a relayer, you have this payload timeless committee that basically vote when the builder reveal the block on time, right? And it is as simple as it gets. The only changes are on the consensus layer side, and the fortress gets complicated, and that's probably my biggest worry. And as turns out, it's not hard to change the format from a block auction to a slot auction as well. I think, like, for example, pre-confirmation, people may really love that. And so now let's talk about some like downsides and pro sides, right? Obviously, this has downsides, and the biggest downside that I do worry about is that, like, if the end game is going to be something that's more like execution ticket or execution auction, we want to take this incremental approach of getting there, right? We don't want to enshrine something, but then it becomes like 2 times harder to revert and do execution ticket. So this is something that's like on top of our mind when we design this type of EPBS to make sure that like we are taking a good incremental step of getting there. For example, for this EPBS, we have our the fortress changes from to basically block slot voting versus just block voting, meaning that currently, if you vote for an empty slot, basically the vote goes to the parent, but it also counts towards the empty slot, the block basically that's empty. So it makes it very easy for X-empty type of attack. But this with the block slot voting, it actually goes against the block. So this kind of discourages a proposer for proposing a late block, right? So we're taking those type of approach. And yeah, I think only time will tell. The EIP just opened 2 weeks ago, and we have more than 1 year to vet the design. So definitely would love to hear feedback on that. And the second question is inclusion list. I definitely want inclusion list. I think inclusion list is very important. I think inclusion list should be part of the EIP. So, but we're kind of, instead of putting in the same EIP, we're just doing 2 EIPs, right? And there are currently many inclusion lists that's getting proposed. One of the EIP is proposed by Mike. It's like 4 inclusion lists. There's another research by the RIG team on Fossil, which is the community-based inclusion list. That's another one that's getting reviewed at. So definitely inclusion list, but the question is which one, and yeah.
Nice. So one question on like one current limitation of EPBS, well, not limitation, but more like a property is that it's bypassable, as in you would still be able as a validator to listen to the auctions from MEV-Boost and then put them into EPBS and propose blocks that are built externally outside of the protocol. So the role of the relayer is still a possibility. Yeah, just a question for Alex. Like, how do you see the future of relayers in like when EPBS comes out? Because like if everyone opts in for EPBS, relayers disappear. So how do you see this?
Yeah, it's a tricky question for many dimensions. I think one that's the first thing I would want to say is like I'm thinking so far ahead, thinking that okay, it's already like at least 1.5 years in the future that we're talking about. Like what does MEV even look like at that point? But trying to get through the fundamentals of this, as a proposer, there's like a trade-off of do I want to use something where I need to trust someone or do I not want to? And it's good to remember that you can already not trust someone. You can just build a vanilla block. And there's a group there where maybe then if we have EPBS in protocol, there's like an avenue where you can still get a block, you can still get some of the MEV reward, and that is enough for you to switch over. So this is more of a calculation of maybe it's not as efficient, but it's more efficient, I'm getting more reward, and that's enough for me. And I think honestly, like there's a small group for who that is interesting. That's the people who are, the solo validators, the people that are just by themselves running this Raspberry Pis in their closets. It can be really interesting. If you're a professional operator, it seems like way quicker. The calculation is just okay, what is like the profitable thing to do here because I'm a business. And there it really becomes about okay, so how close is EPBS going to get to what you can do by bypassing it? And there, I think, yeah, relays would still have a role in. You're still going to see similar dynamics of so how quickly can I get a builder block seen by the whole network, where the timeliness committee says like I saw this on time. What if I don't need to do that and I have a relationship with the proposer? I can go around that, and it's just at some point it's just numbers, and I don't know the numbers for how many people would give up how many rewards. Let alone that things come in like what is the issuance going to be at that point? Is that going to be a lot lower? And you care about the execution rewards? I don't know yet.
I can add on top
Yeah?
to that.
Others have
I think relayer will still be there in EPBS, and that's because of co-location. I think that it's a very underrated benefits. I mean, benefits may not be the right word, but it's an underrated feature of the relayer, because until we do some attestation taking or attestation auction, right, the timing game will always be there. And the relayers are so good at doing that one thing that is just basically co-locate with validators and co-locate with the builders, right? So even in EPBS model, you could still have trustless relayer that all it does is basically play this co-location game to bridge the proposer and the builder, right? Because you can imagine, even in EPBS, if the builders open their RPC endpoint and becomes a relayer, that gets very expensive because now you have, say, 10 builders and 10 of them are running their own relayer versus just one relayer that they could use to essentially play this co-location game. So I do think co-location game is going to be a thing, and I think that's why that relayer will still exist.
But I guess they're no longer relayers, they're just accelerators.
Right.
Networking accelerators. Right.
So are you going to rebrand ultrasound to?
Ultrasound accelerator. We'll see. It's still a ways away, but maybe.
So yeah, just a question for Drew. So how would Commit Boost fit? Do you see with EPBS basically? Do you see it as a bit along relayers, or do you see other paths that are possible for Commit Boost?
Yeah, I actually think Commit Boost opens the playing field to potentially other transaction lifecycle market structures to be created. So if you're a proposer, I don't know all the details of Suave, I'm just using this as an example, but you could actually specify that my block should only be constructed via Suave builders, for instance, and that actually may be outside of the current PBS stack that we see today. So I see it opening up to many of these things. I think it's definitely fully compatible with EPBS and these other type of designs. It doesn't limit that. I don't think it changes too much. And you could actually say maybe you're an Ethereum-aligned home staker and you want to support in-protocol EPBS. You could specify, for instance, my block can only be built via EPBS. And technical input on how you do that, or technical constraints how you do that, putting that aside, but that's kind of the ethos and theory behind it. But I guess with execution APBS, that conversation, I do think Commit Boost becomes a little less relevant at that point in time. It's I don't know if you call them sophisticated actors, but the people that are sophisticated that will likely do the things Commit Boost enables for proposers, they'll just do that as a normal service in business around blocks, and it's still abstracted away from the attesters. So I think it just more formalizes something like Commit Boost.
Okay. Just a round of table question. How do you think? How likely do you think EPBS will be accepted? Wants to start with it? Maybe Terence?
Whole case.
I mean,
The champion.
I don't know. It's a hard question, right? This is Ethereum governance at its finest, because if you look at Petra, right, we say Petra will be the smallest fork, but now it turns out to be the biggest fork, and doesn't look like it's gonna go in until early 2025. And then if you look at what is after Petra, if we want EPBS, then EPBS will have to fight with other important feature as well. And then, I probably will like single stuff finality if that's ready by then. So now it's just what do we choose, right? But in any way, I think at the minimum, it's going to be the end of 2025 or early 2026 at the earliest I can imagine, right? But now the question is just what other features are there that's also as important as EPBS? And that's a question to the community. Yeah.
Was other takes?
Yeah, no. For me, the interval is too wide. It's ask me in a year. I really.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will.
I don't like the all-core devs. I don't join the call. I'm very boring, and I also don't like the politics and whatnot. So I'm happy to delegate it. But if I were to just give a hot take, I'd say. If you strictly consider EPBS, as proposed, then I'd say a 20% chance. But if you widen the definition of EPBS to include a tester-proposer separation, which kind of has EPBS as a subset in some sense, then I'd give it an 80% chance within the next few years.
Okay. Yeah, I have another question. Like, if we go back to slot auctions and the ability to buy slots in advance, so there were like recent discussions about multi-block MEV and some. It's not clear to me. Like, what's like? Is it a real problem for the protocol, and how? Yeah, how do you see it? Yeah, Justin.
Yeah. So multi-slot MEV is very simple. Is when you're the execution proposer and you have multiple slots in a row, there's like some new strategies that open up, especially around arbitrage, where you can delay the arbitrage to the next slot, and that at the minimum it's going to save you some gas and some exchange fees, because you can kind of batch everything at the end as opposed to paying gas along the way. And from a theoretical level, it's a problem today. Right? So if you take a large operator, like a kiln, like some of the time you're going to have 2 blocks in a row. And so if you wanted to, it is within your power to basically work with the builders in order to basically have more MEV for these 2 blocks that are side by side, as opposed to just building this one block, doing the arbitrage here, and then doing another block and doing the arbitrage there, and kind of overpaying for gas. Now, the big problem, of course, is that this gives more power to the larger operators. And that's a centralization vector. And so what we want to do is try and remove that, or somehow embrace it. Now, what people are worried about specifically with a tester proposer separation is that now you're opening up these multi-slot strategies to the broader anonymous market, right? Like Kiln has like reputation, and like if it starts doing that, like people on Twitter will start getting mad and you might stop doing it. But like when you open it up to the market, it's kind of accelerationist. And so people are worried about that. And so I think what we need to do as researchers is really very seriously study this whole design space. And like there are solutions out there. One of them is very simple, is that you remove the look ahead, right? So you don't know who the next proposer will be. You only know the current proposer. And so you can't play the strategy. I mean, maybe you can play it like probabilistically because there's a certain probability that you'll be the next one, but that's like very, very mild compared to knowing for sure that you have 2 slots in a row and executing on that strategy. And then the other approach that I'm aware of right now is basically embracing it and saying that instead of selling slots in advance, we're going to sell whole epochs. And making sure that you don't have a look ahead at the epoch by epoch level. And so there's basically 2 downsides to multi-slot MEV. One is that in some sense, the liquidity providers on Uniswap, for example, are getting like abused a little bit. And that means that users get like worse prices, and it's kind of bad for the whole ecosystem. But you know, that doesn't affect the L1, so from my perspective, you know, it's fine. But like the more worrisome thing is that, you know, we don't want the centralization at L1, and like selling off whole epochs in advance actually is a way to embrace it without having the centralization at L1.
Yeah, I have a more meta question more on the development of Ethereum. So there is usually like a lot of research done upfront and like a lot of strong opinions on how we should do things. And ePBS and PBS is a bit done differently because like there is like first PBS that went to production quite quickly, which was known at the time that it was like had some downsides. And the idea was longer term to enshrine it in the protocol, and this idea has been floating around for quite some time. So the question is like, so on one side you have like pure research that tries to capture all problems and like shove it in the protocol at once, and on the other side you have more like an experimental way where ship first and then try to address problems and while enshrining it in the protocol. How do you see these 2 ways of development in a way? I don't know if you see it that way or.
I mean, the L1 is getting more and more ossified, and it's becoming harder and harder to change. The burden of quality in order to ship something is just up only. And so that means that there's more and more stuff happening off-chain. And you know, we're seeing that all over the place, right? There's like restaking, there's LSTs, there's timing games, there's pre-comps. All of these things are happening kind of around the side. And it's great because it's like an experimental playground. And so we get to learn a lot without taking big risks. And I think like we can be strategic about what we want to prioritize for the L1 in terms of how much negative impact is there. How confident are we that this is like the correct thing that's going to stand the test of time? How easy is it to bring in? But like I'm generally like very, very pleased by the experimentation that's happening off chain.
Okay. I think Vitalik, he talked about this. Maybe I don't remember what day it is, but he kind of put on one side of the scale, you can be an anarchist and you can just like ignore everything that's happening and just protect the protocol. Or on the other side, you can try to integrate everything into the L1. And then there's like this middle ground where we have to rely on out-of-protocol solutions given where Ethereum is today and all that's happening. And then it's specifically focused on that. How do you structure an out-of-protocol software? And obviously, I've thought a lot about this because commit boost. I have the same tagline as MEV-Boost. At some point, we won't need commit boost. Don't worry. But the way I've personally thought about this is, that's the mission, but understanding that may take longer to achieve. How do you structure the governance and the support for commit boost? And so for me personally, it's about setting up a not-profit that owns no monetization public good and then having significant funding for that to have like 3 to 5 people that are focused just on sustaining that software. So if we ask the whole Ethereum community, hey, rely on this out-of-protocol software, there's a team 24/7 that you can call up or whatever that's ready to go. Isn't waking someone up at 3 a.m. that lives in the U.S. to all of a sudden it's a huge fire drill, and that's kind of the mission, at least for commit boost or how we view it. But I'm very much in I think where Vitalik is leaning, which is if we're going to rely on this middle ground, these things that are core for Ethereum out of protocol should be really non-VC backed type public goods, and hopefully for me personally focusing on what's the best use case to kind of do that.
Yeah, because I think also like one criticism of MEV-Boost right now is that it's kind of like not like fully maintained, like it's maintained, but it's kind of like best effort, and whenever there is something to do on it, it's quite hard. So what a lot of folks do is they fork it and like adapt it, or like, we didn't fork it. We have a side thing, but basically it's quite limited. And I guess this is a question like maybe for Terence, like do you think commit boost like basically having like some kind of strong support and open organization behind this sidecar will maybe help reduce the kind of issues you've been dealing with regarding MEV-Boost?
I mean, I think but we still have to kind of like give respect for MEV-Boost for like starting something, right? Just like I feel like they don't deserve the credit like they get. Just every time when things goes wrong, people just kind of like blame them for it. But they do a lot of good things, like which like we wouldn't be here unless it wasn't for them. Personally, I'm like very grateful for MEV-Boost. For example, like if we had enshrined PBS at the merge, then like I think things would be pretty bad right now. Because of this iteration approach, right? We designed like flaws that we did not know before, right? We never knew there was timing game. I never knew there was a single slot bundling attack that someone could pull off, right? And then if that actually happened in protocol, then we will have to do like an emergency hard fork, and then obviously it wouldn't be fun, right? And definitely, I definitely appreciate all the players that has been in so far. I think all the protocol it's definitely help us like getting there to feel safe to enshrine something into the protocol. So,
yeah, I want to echo that too. I think also like we learned a lot through MEV-Boost. Like I don't think when it was launched, people thought about how do we sustain the software if it gets 90% adoption, and we have that learning now for that. But yeah, definitely in no way am knocking on those guys and all the community around that. But like Terence said, I think it's a great example where we have an out-of-protocol solution. It actually helps Ethereum become in a better place, even though in the near term we've had to rely on it.
So just one question like for Justin, maybe on pre-confirmations. So pre-confirmations, or maybe, whoever wants to take it. Pre-confirmations is currently built off protocol, and it's probably going to be that way for quite a while. Do you see a world where it's going to be enshrined at some point, or should it stay more like off protocol?
Yeah, it's fundamentally an off-protocol thing because the pre-confirmation is a off-chain bilateral agreement between a user and the proposer or sequencer, however you want to call it. And the L1 is not even aware of the fact that a pre-confirmation has happened. It just sees a transaction. It doesn't know about the wrapping of the pre-confirmation.
I guess some people are saying faster block times. Maybe that's the version of in protocol.
Right, like the word pre-confirmation is overloaded. It can either mean this bilateral agreement with the next proposer, or it can mean very fast slot times. I use it usually in the former context. One of the interesting things with pre-confirmations is that it can basically completely change the way that block building happens. So right now, block building is monolithic in the sense that the most competitive builder gets to build the whole block for the whole slot. And they can enforce some of their preferences. So if they want to censor, then the whole block is censored. On the other hand, with pre-confirmations, the block building model is very similar to Solana, actually. There's this real-time block building where you kind of build from the top of the block shred by shred. So that's the terminology that Solana uses. And it's kind of tick by tick. So within a 400 millisecond Solana slot, you have 32 ticks. And so each tick is 12.5 milliseconds. And so you kind of build these little pieces of blocks from top to bottom. And the way that these ticks get committed is with something called proof of history. So it's like this cryptographic delay function, like a VDF, where once you've committed to it, it's kind of hard to go back in time. And what pre-confirmations are is this notion of real-time block building with shreds, tick by tick, where you use financial incentives, so collateral, instead of using this delay function. And one of the nice things here is that, in some sense, there is no builder, right? There's the user and there's the sequencer, and it's done on a shred-by-shred basis. And at every shred, you have an auction with the searchers. So you have some sort of user intent. For example, I want to buy these tokens. I want to get the best execution. And then the searchers will compete against each other to provide the best shred that satisfies the intent. And so builders, in some sense, are taken away from the equation. And that is very positive for the network, for example, with censorship. So today, roughly 90% of the proposers are not censoring, in the sense that they are willing to connect to ultrasound or other relays that don't censor. And only about 10% only connect to censoring relays. So that's a very healthy kind of ratio, 90 to 10. But on the builder side of things, it's much, much worse. It's like 2/3 censoring, 1/3 non-censoring. And so if we can remove the builder censorship from the equation, with pre-confirmations, we actually have a very much uncensored network, because only 10% of the blocks will be censored, as opposed to today, where 2/3 of the blocks are censored.
OK. Yeah, I guess we have time for questions now, if there are questions. Yeah, maybe there is a mic. I don't know where the mic is. Oh, OK.
Just wanted to ask about the relays. For example, right now, the relays also serve for the builders when they do like a sex dex arbitrage, or want to basically like match their prices with the sex prices. Sometimes they have to cancel the bid because it's not profitable anymore. So there is the incentive for them to continue with the relays, even if we have EPBS. Is there any solution we have in mind how to solve it?
For EPBS, I am not aware of a solution, but I think that it's an important feature. It's something that I actually learned that like 2 days ago. So something that I have been thinking about. I don't have a good solution in mind right now, but I will probably go home, think hard about that, and post something. But yeah.
So there is technically a solution if
cryptography.
If you use fancy cryptography called fully homomorphic encryption. So basically, instead of sending your bids publicly, you encrypt them. And then the way that you aggregate the bids, you take like the encrypted thing that you're doing is basically taking the highest non-cancelled bid. And so now what gets picked is basically the highest non-cancelled bid. So it is possible to do, but it requires fancy crypto.
Yeah. Can we get the cost down enough to make sure that this is available? I suppose you have to build it somehow. You have to find a solution for this, and like, is that doable? Can we build it?
I actually gave a talk just before this panel at Encryption Day, and these guys called Phoenix that work on fully homomorphic encryption. And I think the thing is that there's quite a bit of latency, and so like even if it takes 50 milliseconds to do this thing, it's just too much. It needs to be less than 1 millisecond. And unfortunately, I mean, maybe you have better stats, but like pretty much every single builder uses cancellations almost all the time. And maybe this is a discussion that we can have in the Oracle Dev calls. Is like we have stats. We know like that blocks are getting canceled all the time. Yeah. And part of the reason why cancellation is so important, as you said, is like sexdex arbitrages. You know, the price moves every millisecond, and so every time it moves, they want to cancel and refresh.
Yeah, we can see that very clearly. If anybody wants to know exactly how much cancelable bids are above non-cancellables, then we can provide that happily. Yeah.
But is it something that could be addressed like statistically from the builder side, as in like they know they will have X% of cancellations anyway, so they could decrease their bids by this amount, right? Or are they going to compete?
You think? Yeah, I'm not sure. How I think about this is like you could say like the outside world is constantly moving, and if you can update what you're doing on chain in the end, that is valuable. And like how much does the outside world move sort of relative, like, right? That's what they're capturing in a way. And being able to respond to that, I imagine, at least in some moments in time where there's huge things happening off-chain, is really, really valuable.
Actually, there is a low-tech solution to the cancellations, which is that the proposer signs the get header request. Basically, they instead of the builders pushing the bids, it's the proposer pulling one bid. And now the proposer can only pull one bid from the builder, and now the builder just gives the best bid at the point where it was requested and nothing else. Yeah. I guess that requires maybe re-architecting the IIP.
So I have like two questions. One is like, what is the mental model that you use to think about like MEV? Like sometimes we say that it's okay to embrace this for XYZ thing, but sometimes it's not. Like what is the mental model that we think of when we say that this is like, these are like the fundamental rules and like this is not acceptable and it is okay if you do this? That's the first. And the second is like for someone like who doesn't run a relay or a builder or anything, how do you reason about things like how profitable is something like co-location or how profitable is something like multi-block MEV? Like for example, I heard someone tell me the other day that maybe this is incorrect, but like a lot of the revenue for block builders come from SLAs and probably not like from MEV. So like, is there any place for like people who are not running these things to figure out like get this information?
You mean to get the information of how much MEV there is, or how much is there that is not okay?
What is exactly, like, what are the different parameters that we talk about, like co-location, multi-block, MEV, SLAs? How much money are like builders making from each of these segments today?
I mean, one gold mine is Andreas Canido from CalSwap, because he did a lot of research of quantifying MEV, and he has a lot of insight through the agnostic relay, which is kind of run by the CalSwap guys. And also CalSwap has the MEV blocker, which has a lot of flow, and so they have relationships with wallets and whatnot. You're right, like so the public mempool is dying. Already 30% of transactions are not going through the public mempool. My prediction is that within 12 months, only 10% of the Ethereum transactions will go through the public mempool. 90% will go through these encrypted mempools. And the reason is that there's two benefits. One, from the user's perspective, you don't get front run. But then maybe more importantly, from the wallet perspective, they get to capture the back run. And they get to have these SLAs and contracts with the builders where the builders do the back running, the builders take their cut, but they receive the lion's share. And so, MetaMask, for example, recently came up with their own encrypted mempool, and they have legal contracts with various top builders from which they probably extract millions of dollars per month. And every single wallet will do that. I think Rabby Wallet does that. So that's one thing where, we want to basically look at the value of these backruns. Mm-hmm. Ideally, the backrun goes to the user. So what I want to see is a wallet building two buttons. Like there's the send transaction button, and then right next to it there's a send transaction and pay me $100. Okay, and I think if a wallet were to build this, everyone would start using it, and all the users would start getting the backrun as opposed to the wallet getting the $100. Now, in terms of mental model for latency, is very, very easy. there's 800 ETH per day of MEV. It's very, very predictable. You can look on MEV-Boost.pix. It's just up only at 800 ETH per day. And so you can quantify every millisecond. Just take 800 ETH per day divided by the number of milliseconds in the day, and that will tell you how much each millisecond is worth. And it turns out it can be worth quite a lot if you're a large operator. And so, like, if you can shave, 10 milliseconds here and there, then you'll improve the amount of MEV that you have. In terms of like quantifying the multi-slot MEV, like you need to talk to the DEX people. So I would talk maybe to the Paradigm people or Uniswap people. And in terms of like what is like good MEV and bad MEV, it depends on your perspective. Like from the layer 1 perspective, like really bad stuff, for example, is like reorg MEV, where like you're just reorging blocks or 51% MEV. But the good news is that's not happening. And so what's left is the application level MEV that doesn't impact the L1 too much. And my perspective now has been more and more that any MEV is bad. Like even the arbitrage, right? There was this saying that, okay, arbitrage is good because it equalizes the price. No, it's terrible. Really the reason is that there is a user which is impacted, which is the liquidity provider, and that ultimately means that the users, the swappers, also get a worse price. And the good news is that there's new DEX designs that are coming out right now, where the arbitrage opportunity is captured by the DEX itself and can be rebated back to the LPs, which ultimately give better prices to the users. And there's this crazy statistic that this guy Austin from Uniswap Lab told me is that from the inception of actually since the merge, I think there's about $2 billion that was leaked of MEV from Uniswap. So basically, users ultimately lost $2 billion if there was a better DEX design than Uniswap v3 or v2 or whatever it is.
That's crazy. Maybe a small add also, think in a larger picture. If I'm a user, gambling on some very low cap coin, and I don't care, what the execute, then there's a lot of room for this to happen and for you to get terrible execution for. And as we move more and more towards applications where you're doing much more, I'm paying for a coffee and like half of my price that I'm paying, or like 3 times, is like all this craziness that's happening and people extracting things along the way. This, of course, not good. So I imagine there's also a lot of room to just build the apps that care, the apps that say, and here you have $100 for this transaction that you're executing, because that's how it should be.
Thank you.
Well, I think we are finished now. Yeah. Well, thanks for.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.